Hello, welcome to the Saroy channel. I've got such a lovely story for you tonight, and it's called Bigfoot Haunted My House. So let's give it a go. I think you're really going to enjoy this story. I always love these stories before we go to bed at night. There's something so cozy about listening to a good story. So let's get started. Dear Sarah, I have a Bigfoot story I would like to share with you and your listeners, and I would like to add that I really appreciate remaining anonymous for professional reasons if you do not mind. Here is my story. I was a single mother at the time. It was in 2010, 10 years ago, when I moved into a rental home in eastern Kentucky. It was not your usual rental home with all the mod cons, but on the contrary, it was a very shabby house that needed a good paint job and a few simple repairs. I got the house for very cheap rental fees, as long as I put a little loving care into the home at my own expense. It seemed like a great deal to me. What sold it to me was that the house was in a very remote area, if you know what I mean, and I liked the privacy and secluded feeling it had about it. I had grown up in a family of more than 7 siblings, and so for me, privacy was a precious gift. What I liked most about the property was that it was set on several acres of land with its own little forest and creek, where you would get wildlife congregating to drink the water. Another great thing about the house was that it was self-furnished with some quality pieces of furniture that were far from cheap, but very out of date. I knew I could turn my hand at modernizing the whole look of the home, and I was so excited about that. I did only have one problem. I was a hospice nurse that worked night duty with dying patients. Not the kind of job in the world that most people would enjoy. But for me, I really liked helping people coming to the end of their lives and facing their inevitable demise. It also gave me a great appreciation and thankfulness for my own life. As I could only work night duty from 6:30 to 5 a.m. in the morning, I needed to get a babysitter who was prepared to look after my baby during the witching hours. Not a job that was in great demand, but I did interview a few young ladies for the job. They always seemed keen at first, but then a day later they would suddenly make some excuse that they had changed their minds all of a sudden and didn't want to work for me after all. Over and over again this happened. Everyone I hired would let me down within days of working for me. I wondered if it was the remoteness of my house, or was it that they hated the late hours that they had to work, or perhaps they didn't like the pay, or worse still, they didn't like me. Finally, I'd had enough, when once again I was greeted by the babysitter with her resignation letter telling me that the job just wasn't right for her. Is it the pay? I asked. I think it's a fair wage, don't you? Not nearly enough, answered the girl. You could not pay me $1 million to stay another night in this horrid house of yours. I know it's old, I apologized, and it needs a lot of work on it, but surely it's not that bad, is it? You really don't know, do you? You have no idea, she said, looking at me with surprise. Idea about what? I asked. That your house is seriously spooky, and it's seriously haunted. I saw a dark shadow one day outside the window, and it was looking at me, she said. I think it was a shadow person, and it had these disgusting red eyes. It was very evil looking. I think it was a demon, she said suddenly. She started to whimper like a puppy. I could tell that she was well and truly rattled by what she thought she'd seen. It could have been your mind just playing tricks on you, I said, trying to make her feel better. No, I know that's what I saw, she protested. So I started to phone around all the babysitters that I'd hired, begging them to get real with me and to tell me the real reason they were not willing to babysit my 2-year-old. Had they had any funny experiences in the house, I wanted to know. I hasten to say everyone had a story to tell me, that they had been scared senseless. Most recounted strange noises on the pipe, roof and window panes of my house. One mentioned a shrill scream coming from the woods that sounded like a woman being murdered, and another person talked about a gargantuan ghost-like creature with red eyes staring at them through the window. The easy thing to do would be to move out and rent a house in a less remote area, but I wasn't about to give up on my house immediately. I needed to do some investigating first. I thought that I'd call pest control to find out if we had any kind of animal living in our house, perhaps under the floorboards or in the walls. Anything was possible, I thought. Pest control informed me that I did not have a pest problem. I decided to see if I could get hold of one of those paranormal investigators to come over and research my property to see if they could find out if my property was indeed haunted. The paranormal investigator told me that there were no signs of any ghostly phenomenon in my house after they had finally done the investigation. What am I to do? I almost cried. How can I fix a problem when I do not know what the heck it is? Well, look, said the investigator, looking a little sorry for me. This is going to sound really weird, but I don't know how to say this. But you could possibly have a Sasquatch problem. What is a Sasquatch? I asked. A sort of ape-man, monster kind of thing. I've been doing a lot of research on it recently, and I noticed some whooping sounds coming from your woods, he said, presenting a tape to me so that I could listen to the strange sounds that he recorded. They were incredible. Even I had to admit that. You think that's the Sasquatch thing? I asked. He asked me if he could come over the following day to look around my woods. I just want to look around the place for a possible nest area, maybe some carcasses of dead animals, possibly some tree breaks, stuff like that, he said. The next day he came over to my house with his friend. The two of them seemed very excited. This is Tim, he said to me. He knows quite a lot about Sasquatches. They did find lots of tree breaks in the wood, and they found quite a few carcasses of dead animals strewn all over the place, but they couldn't find any conclusive evidence that I did indeed have a Sasquatch problem, or that there was one living in the woods. The following week I decided to work day shifts and leave my baby with one of my neighbours while I investigated what was going on at my home. 2 nights passed with no activity, and I began to think that all those babysitters had been telling me pork pies. Then it happened. I could hear whooping sounds coming from the forest. I grabbed my flashlight and my rifle, and I sped outdoors like a cheetah in search of its prey. On reflection, I must have been stark, raving, barking mad to go off into the woods in the middle of the night. I mean, who does that? Anyway, I entered the woody area of the property I was renting, and I noticed that I did not hear the sounds of crickets or night creatures that you would normally hear. I just heard these whooping sounds. Suddenly, my flashlight caught a movement. I saw eye shine, and the eyes looked reddish. This was not a ghost, it was a real creature, and I had never seen anything like this in my entire life. It was humongous. I would say, at a guess, he was at least 800 pounds. His whole body covered with dark hair, but I couldn't see the colour clearly in the dark. The thing was so muscular and so imposing that I knew in one swipe he could have my head off in seconds. I do not recall all the physical details properly because everything happened so quickly. He growled at me with the most loud, menacing growl that literally went through every fibre of my being. I just remembered screaming at the top of my lungs and running away as fast as I could to my neighbour's house. I know that this creature was what you would call a Bigfoot. Of that I am in no doubt, and he seemed extremely territorial, which is why I think he's been harassing people staying at the house I was renting. Now things were starting to make sense. The cheap rental cost for the property, with a substantial amount of woodland. A house that needed a little bit of tender, loving care. Possibly every workman on the property and every painter had not stayed for very long. Could you blame them? The next day I cancelled my lease on the property, and the lady on the end of the phone sounded really flawed. Everyone just stays at that home for just a few minutes and then they're gone. Oh, it's nothing to do with the property, I lied, secretly hating myself for not telling her the truth. I just think it's too large a project for me to take on at the moment, though your rent is very reasonable. That's what they all say, dear, she said. Anyway, Sarah, and your listeners, that's my Bigfoot story. Thank you for letting me share it with you. Thank you so very much. Until next time, good night.